Good day, I'm Stephen McHugh, and this is your JIS News for Tuesday, February 11. The Ministry of Health and Wellness says test results should be ready in 2 to 3 days for the individual who was placed in isolation yesterday after recording an elevated temperature and having recently returned from China. The unidentified person had been in quarantine for 8 days, in keeping with government's recent travel restrictions, which demand that all persons allowed to enter the island from China will be subject to immediate quarantine for a minimum of 14 days.
Samples have been taken and will be processed by the National Influenza Center and sent overseas for testing.
This is the first person to develop any symptom after being placed in quarantine. Another individual was previously placed in immediate isolation upon arriving from China and displaying mild symptoms, which the Health Ministry says have since resolved. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Jacqueline Bisesa McKenzie says while that individual's symptoms did not necessarily meet the case definition for the novel coronavirus, they remain in isolation for the full quarantine period out of an abundance of caution. These two persons are among 116 individuals who arrived in the country between January 23 and February 8 after being in China 14 days prior to their arrival. 27 were not granted landing privileges, while 10 persons were placed in a quarantine facility operated by the Ministry of Health. Another 78 persons were assessed as being low risk for infection and have been quarantined at home for follow-up with the local health departments.
I want to pause here to recognize and thank the healthcare team for their diligence and overall monitoring of this situation.
The health minister gave the update during a press briefing at his ministry yesterday. Government says the 2020-2021 financial year will be the start of a decade of growth, underpinned by a robust legislative agenda, as well as accelerated investments in infrastructure, renewable energy, skills development, environmental protection, and crime and violence. The agenda was outlined in the throne speech delivered by Governor-General Sir Patrick Allen during this morning's ceremonial opening of Parliament. With security as a high priority, he said there would be significant capital investment and social intervention to address the scourge of crime. In addition, 3 critical pieces of legislation will be advanced: the Law Enforcement Protection of Integrity Act, Corrections Amendment Act, and the Aliens Act and Immigration Restriction Commonwealth Citizenship Act amendments legislation.
The government maintains that a whole-of-society approach is required to tackle the issue of crime and violence.
Meanwhile, a new NIDS bill will be tabled, along with amendments to the Registration of Births and Deaths Act. The Governor-General also announced continued heavy investment under the Greater Infrastructure Development Program.
We will be building smart infrastructure with fiber optics, cameras, and sensors designed and embedded into our infrastructure assets.
Water and housing are also priority areas for the new financial year, and interventions will include the provision of water supply solutions to approximately 180,000 rural residents. At the same time, government intends to complete the National Squatter Survey and proceed to the full rollout of its new social housing program. The government will also advance plans for the development of new high schools focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics (STEM) education. And in the area of health, the Andrew Holness administration says this fiscal year will witness the largest spend on health infrastructure in over 3 decades. The Governor-General's throne speech preceded this afternoon's tabling of the 2020-2021 estimates of expenditure, which outlines government's spending and expected earnings for the new financial year. In other news, work has begun on the Port Maria Police Station in St. Mary, which will also be the divisional headquarters. The 4-story facility is being built at a cost of $250 million through funding from the National Housing Trust. It is slated for completion in 2023 and will replace the previous station, which was damaged by fire several years ago. National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang says the renovation and rebuilding of police stations across the island is a targeted approach by the government to improve the working environment of police officers. He says this measure is being twinned with providing officers with adequate tools such as non-lethal weapons, uniforms, and modern technology to expand the security force's capacity to fight crime.
It's a big investment, but we consider it necessary, not only for the security of the population, but to give our police men and women the tools to work with effectively across Jamaica. And I'm confident, I have no doubt in my mind, that once the officers are given the right working conditions and the appropriate tools, they will get crime under control in Jamaica and make the public safe to operate in.
The new 28,000 square foot facility in Port Maria will house living quarters and a cell block. Public passenger vehicles PPV owners will have the option of renewing their licenses online at their own convenience via the Transport Authority's website. The move is part of measures to streamline services and improve operations of the agency. Transport Minister Robert Montague says this will be done through an online renewal portal, which is expected to be in operation later this month.
So Brother Blair and all the persons in the public passenger vehicle will be able to stay at home, sit down at home, take up them smartphone or them tablet. Brother Blair can go on him Apple computer, go on to our portal, put in the required information, get your license renewed, and him just swipe him credit card, and we take him money, and we send him the renewal.
Minister Montague was speaking recently at the Transport Authority and Hope National Service Corps Drivers Training launch. He said route taxis would not be part of the initial launch of the online renewal portal. And finally, Parliamentary Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, Senator Robert Morgan, has called for the establishment of a bipartisan commission to look into the funding of tertiary education. Senator Morgan says the commission would also examine the current challenges relating to the funding of tertiary education. He was making his contribution to the 2019-2020 State of the Nation debate on Friday.
Mr. President, a bipartisan commission that borrows on broad stakeholder consultations, including students, including politicians, including teachers, including school owners, would be tasked with coming up with a unified position on the way forward for the funding of tertiary education for the next 50 years.
Senator Morgan argued that this is necessary, especially in the context that 70% of tertiary graduates leave Jamaica shortly after graduation. He proposed that an incentive scheme be established for tertiary students who join essential services as a means of dissuading them from migrating. Some of the essential services he cited included critical care nurses, police, firefighters, and teachers.
I'm suggesting today that we give an incentive to certain critical industries in Jamaica where, for example, if you join the police force and spend 5 years, your student loan will be forgiven. If you give young people an incentive and show them that you believe in them, they will show that they believe in the country.
Senator Morgan said the necessary supporting framework would be established to support the incentive scheme. And that's it for JIS News Today. I'm Stephen McHugh. Thanks for watching.